What's going on, everybody? And welcome back here to another week on Guns and Butter with your favorite cousin, Kinda G. Now, I hope everybody's had a great week and y'all are ready to kick off this Memorial Day weekend. And I missed y'all, so go ahead, sit on down, get comfortable, get your wine, get your popcorn, and let's go ahead and dive right into this week's case. Because all I gotta say this week is, you can't run, you can't hide, they're always gonna find you, my boy.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
All right, cousins. So this week I'm going to be telling y'all about a young lady by the name of Evelyna Leblanc. Evelyna was the only daughter and the apple of her mother Arlene Leblanc's eyes, and she describes her as being a loving, intelligent, and beautiful girl who had a beautiful spirit, and she was just truly the apple of her eye. She had big, brown, sparkling eyes, soft brown skin, she loved dancing, and she was just a lovable person. She loved to make you laugh, and she just had a bubbly, bright personality. She was a great student, and she was just the type of person that if you met her, you would never forget her. On a rainy night on November 5th, 1994, at around 8:30 p.m. in San Leandro, California, an officer by the name of Jim Stark was dispatched to investigate an alarm that was going off at Jefferson Elementary School. And this school alarm is kind of interesting because it picks up on movement and sound. And at the moment, it was being triggered by banging coming from the building. Now, when Detective Stark first gets to the building, he's walking around and nothing looks out of place. Everything looks secure. No doors look open, no windows, nothing looks broken. But instead of looking at this secure building and taking this as a sign to leave, he continues to investigate. So he keeps walking around the building because he just wants to make sure he's not missing anything. So he decides to walk around the school grounds. But when he comes to the end of the building, he notices an umbrella and it's upside down collecting rain. Then he starts to see a trail of clothing, a pair of shoes, a jacket. So he continues to follow the trail. And as he's walking around the building, he can hear a light tapping, so he follows the noise. And when he arrives at the noise, he sees a young girl laying beside the school wall on her side. She was tapping her left hand against the building. She was naked from the waist down, and he immediately notices a gunshot wound to her head. So he calls for backup. Then he takes his raincoat off and covers her. He grabs her hand and he comforts her. The girl was immediately rushed to the hospital, and while investigators on the scene work quickly to recover all of the evidence that they can, however, it's raining and a lot of evidence is washing away as we speak. Shoe prints are being destroyed, blood, any type of evidence that would usually be collected. It's just getting washed away right now. However, they were able to recover a shell casing near the umbrella, so they assume that this is most likely where she was shot. And they could tell that her body was dragged to the side of the building where she was found. And then they find her purse with her school ID, and it's quickly made clear that this girl is 15-year-old Evelyna Leblanc. And it's said that during the attack, either Evelyna or the suspect may have hit the fence, activating the school's alarm. But by the time her mother was notified and made it to the hospital, Evelyna was on life support fighting for her life. The doctor came in and told her that after a long fight, Evelyna would probably never be able to get off of life support, and she wouldn't be able to sustain life without it. So in that moment, her mother had to make the most difficult decision she ever had to make, which was taking her baby girl off of life support. So the case immediately went from an assault to a homicide. And investigators were working tirelessly trying to figure out who could have done this to Evelyna and what was the motive. Now, not only was Evelyna shot in the head, but she was also raped. And luckily, they were able to collect a sample from her body. And with this, they ran the DNA sample through the national database, but they got nothing. So for now, they had to hope that the killer would commit another crime so that they can get a DNA hit on the match. But until then, in the meantime and in between time, they started doing old-fashioned detective work. They started mapping out her day, from the time she woken up to the time she was attacked. And they started looking for witnesses, anything trying to figure out what happened. And this is when they find out that Evelyna had went to a local high school football game that day. But that day it was cold and rainy, and she didn't want to be stuck in the cold rain anymore. So she decided to leave her friends and leave the game a little bit earlier and get on the city bus to head home. And from there, they got in contact with the city bus driver, who was able to tell police that she remembered seeing Evelyna on the bus that day. And she says that a short time after she had gotten on the bus, a young man started calling out to her. And Evelyna ends up getting up and walking to the back of the bus where she was seen talking to this young man. And when she gets dropped off, the both of them get off on the same stop around 6:30 p.m. Evelyna gets off and the bus driver says that it looks like she sees her about to cross the street. And that was the last time anyone had seen her alive. She was killed only 5 blocks from where she was last seen. So now they needed to figure out who this young man was. And with that information, police create a composite sketch of who they believe Evelyna was last seen with. So based off the bus driver's description, he was a light-skinned African American. He had a thin build and he had cornrows in his head. So with this composite sketch, they posted the flyer everywhere. They talked to everyone in Evelyna's life. And with that, they're getting DNA samples from all the males in her circle as well as in the neighborhood. But to their surprise, they got no hits on the DNA samples or the sketch. And this was so frustrating to the investigators working the case as well as her mom because she just wanted justice for her baby. But as weeks turned into months and months turned into years, Evelyna's case just got colder and colder. 13 years later, in March of 2006, in Portland, Oregon, a 35-year-old woman by the name of Elena Thompson was leaving a bar where she was there with a couple of friends playing pool. And she wanted to go ahead and head home, so she decided instead of waiting for her friends, she was just going to walk home. So as she's walking, she sees a man coming from around a truck across the street. And as he's walking up to her, he tells her his name, but she can barely understand him. It sounds something like Naji or Nani. But he proceeds to ask if she's from the islands. And she says, "No, I'm not from the islands." And in that moment, she can see that this guy is getting angry. So she's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm from the islands. I was just playing." And then his demeanor started to calm down again. But she's like, "I don't know what's up with Buddy, but I got to get away from him." So she just keeps on walking and she speeds up to get across the bridge. And when she looks back, she doesn't see him anymore. But it still feels like someone is following her. And then all of a sudden, he pops back up on a blue bike. And she tells him, "You need to stop following me." And then she lies and tells him that the police were following her because she had gotten into a fight at the bar, so the police were looking for her. But the dude wasn't going for it. He says, "No, bitch, I'm following you." And then he jumps off his bike and dives at her, and they start fighting. They're tussling, rolling around on the ground, and then Elena can hear him pull out something that she's thinking is a fishing knife. And then he starts stabbing her in her hands and the top of her head, and she can hear him repeating that God told him to. But just as he's about to stab her again, a man on a skateboard comes by out of nowhere, and he stops the man. The guy gets up off of her, grabs his bike, and runs off. The skateboarder immediately calls 911 and the medical team arrives to take Elena to the hospital. And she can remember the medical professionals telling her that if she had waited like 5 more minutes, she would have been gone because she had lost so much blood. So back at the crime scene, they're able to recover a shoe from the attack. And they send this little funky shoe off for forensic testing. And they send it to a doctor by the name of Dr. Janelle Scott at the Oregon State Crime Lab. Now, based off of what they said at this forensic lab, shoes aren't really a good source of DNA because they don't really have direct contact with the skin, given that most people wear socks in between their shoes and their feet. So it is a long shot, but it's worth the shot. And it actually wasn't a complete flop. Like it hit the rim. It didn't go in, but it hit the rim. Because Dr. Scott was able to recover a partial profile. And this is really good because now investigators just need to put a name and a face to the crime, which isn't going to be the easy part, but it's definitely possible. Now, although it wasn't a whole lot of DNA, it was enough to get a match when they ran it through the database. And y'all, the DNA profile was a match to a homicide that took place all the way back in 1994 in California. However, although this DNA just linked these two crimes, that's all it did. It didn't put a face to the crime. It didn't give a name, no height, no ethnic background. All it told them was that it was a male. So the Portland police get to work to find out who this man could be. And this is when a detective by the name of Detective Molly Dahl, who is the investigator for Alina Thompson's attack, she immediately gets to work and dives headfirst into the investigation. So Detective Dahl goes to speak with Elena, and Elena is able to recall a lot about what this dude looked like. She tells Detective Dahl that he was black, younger, maybe in his early 20s. He had a medium build, maybe around 5'8". He had dark slanted eyes, short hair, and she remembers he introduced himself as Naji or Nani. So Elena starts asking around, asking her friends, and she's describing what this guy looks like. And lo and behold, one of her friends actually recognizes the description of this guy. And she's like, I think I was released from the same jail. Like we was released on the jail bus and I met a guy by the name of Naji. And she tells him that he hangs out downtown. So Detective Dahl hurries up and runs through the backlots of the prison transport bus. And she comes up with a list of about 3 black males that had similar characteristics as this description. And although none of these names had the exact name as Naji, she keeps digging. And she keeps digging into each one of their backgrounds, each one of their police records. And she looks into the second dude's police record. And while she's going through his aliases or his nicknames, she finds Naji. So now it's seeming like they finally have a name and a face. All they had to do now was make sure that his DNA matched the DNA profile that was in the system. But y'all, this is when it gets a little bit tricky because when Detective Dahl brings Elena a photo lineup, she is unable to identify any of the men in this lineup. And the detectives are thinking, hey, sometimes the witnesses get it wrong. However, the lab results come back and it wasn't a match to this dude. Now, although the DNA didn't match, they still decided to bring him in and question him. And while he's down at the office being questioned, they go ahead and collect a DNA sample from him there. And while this DNA sample is being sent off to the lab, in the meantime, they go ahead and send over some mug shots to Elena to identify this person. And Elena doesn't recognize any of the men in the mug shots. And with that, they're kind of back at square one. But at this point, Detective Dahl is kind of getting a little bit discouraged because she's convinced that this is the same person that killed Evelyna and is responsible for the attack on Elena. And she knew he would attack again. It was just a matter of when. So Detective Dahl is busy and she decides she's going to work with a crime analyst to come up with a list of recent arrests in Northeast Portland that matched the physical description that Elena gave. And sadly, they just weren't moving fast enough because while they're trying to come up with this profile, this crime profile, a third attack happens. That same year, on April 14th, 2006, still in Portland, Oregon, police receive a 911 call saying that there was a woman laying on the side of the road bleeding. So upon arriving at the scene, they figure out that this woman's name is Sharvetta Brown. She's a 37-year-old mother of 2, and when they get there, they see that she's bleeding from her head. Unfortunately, her head trauma was so bad that they were unable to save her, and she died at the hospital. Now, from the indentations in her head, it appeared that she had been struck with a hammer. So back at the scene, police are trying to collect as much evidence as they possibly can. But once again, it's raining, and a lot of evidence is washing away. There's no blood, there's no tire impressions, nothing. But the detective assigned to this case is Detective Lynn Courtney. And he hits the ground running. He's kind of moving quickly, moving really smart as well, because he starts looking into all the 911 calls from that night. And he discovers that a phone call was placed earlier that evening about 8 blocks away from where they actually found Sharvetta's body. And thankfully, the caller is able to identify the car. It's a white Chevy truck. They think it's like a S10 with a white canopy on top. So originally, when they get this call, the police arrive at the scene, but they don't see the car. They don't see anybody arguing, and they don't find anything, so they leave. So the investigators believe that the attack started about 8 blocks away. And then the attacker put Sharvetta back in the truck and dumped her body where she was then found. And they also assumed that this truck was most likely stolen. So they sent out the information for the truck to all of the surrounding areas, and they put a bee on the lookout for a stolen white truck with a canopy on top. And of course, this car was recovered and it was returned to its owner. So police are able to track down the owner of this truck. And they start dusting it for fingerprints, looking for blood splatter, anything. And that's when they find blood inside and outside of the car. And they also discover that the owner says that a claw hammer that was kept in the glove compartment was missing. And it looked like whoever had stolen the truck did try to clean up a little bit. However, they weren't too bright because they left behind the bloody tissues that they used to wipe up the blood with. And they figured out that this blood did match Sharvetta's. And not only that, but the missing claw hammer went along with their theory that she was struck with a hammer. And when they interview Sharvetta's friend, they find out that she actually was with Sharvetta that night, and they were offered a ride by this man in a white truck. And once they got in, her friend said that she had a bad feeling about this guy. He just seemed really weird and just like off. So she read the room and she told Sharvetta that she was getting out. She said, "Nah, friend, I'm not going where y'all is going. Just go ahead and drop me off." She didn't feel comfortable. And she asked Sharvetta if she wants to come with her, but she tells her no. She says, "I'll stay and I'll catch up with you later." And her friend was able to tell the investigators this guy's name. She tells him that his name was Imani or something like that. So with this name Imani, Detective Courtney is back at his computer and he's running all types of searches of this name or variations of this name. And this is when he comes up with 2 people. Meanwhile, Detective Dahl is sitting a couple cubicles away from Detective Courtney, and she's still working tirelessly on Elena's assault. But she hears him say the name Imani. And that's when a light bulb goes off in her head. And she's like, "Oh my goodness, what case are you working on?" And in that moment, they start running their cases by one another. And she's like, "Oh my goodness, I think this is our guy. I think we have him. This is the same guy in Elena's case." So she starts searching the database for a guy by the name of Imani Charles Williams. He's 27 years old, and she starts going through his criminal background. And in his background, she's able to see that he had a series of arrests in the 1990s in the Oakland Bay area. And he was living in the same area as Evelyna. And lo and behold, a picture of this guy pops up in the system. Okay, so now they finally have a picture. They finally have a name and a face. And because this Imani Williams dude was a felon, a DNA sample had been collected on him. However, his samples hadn't been analyzed yet. They were still sitting in the freezer waiting to be tested. So Detective Dahl puts a rush on Buddy's DNA because they're trying to figure out if he is connected to these different crimes. And she immediately puts together a photo lineup for Elena. And finally, Elena picks out this man's photo from the lineup. And to put the icing on the cake and to completely seal this deal, Detective Dahl gets a call from the lab letting her know that the DNA samples match Evelyna's murder and Elena's attack. So once they've matched the results to this Imani Williams, they head downtown to his hangout spot and they arrest him in downtown Oregon. And his dusty ass is charged with the first-degree assault of Elena Thompson and the murder of Sharvetta Brown. And with that, Detective Dahl calls all the way down to California and informs them that after 13 long years, they finally found the perpetrator that murdered Evelyna Leblanc. So after all these years, the detectives from California fly to Oregon because they want to look Buddy in his face when they tell him, "We got you." But when the California detectives are speaking to this guy and they're asking him if he knows who Evelyna Leblanc is, he's like, "No." They're like, "Are you positive? You don't know her. She was an acquaintance. She wasn't anything to you." But he just sat there silently looking cold and careless. And just to be sure, they go ahead and collect another DNA sample just to, really put the nail in his coffin. And of course, it is a match. So with that, he ends up pleading guilty to murder and the first-degree assault for Elena. And he's sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. But y'all, listen to this. So based on the timeline, when he killed Elena, he would have been about 14 years old. And because he was only a juvenile in 1994, he wasn't able to be charged with the murder and rape for Evelyna. So due to his juvenile status in California and the statutes of limitations and all that stuff, they wouldn't be able to prosecute him for that. But if he actually had been caught, tried, and convicted for her murder, he would have been sent to the California Youth Authority until he was 25 years old. And by this time, when they had found him, he was already 29 years old. So sadly, although they did know that he was the person that killed Evelyna, there really wasn't any justice for her murder because, yeah, there was closure, but he wasn't convicted for what he had done to her. His little dusty ass makes me sick. How are you 14 years old out here just killing folks? But that just goes to show you how comfortable people are with committing crimes. Like, you just thought that you were going to be jumping from state to state, killing people and getting no consequences. He just knew the moment he left California, he would never be caught. You can't outrun the law, and you definitely can't outrun the DNA matches that they found on you. But y'all, that's the end of this week's case. I hope y'all enjoyed listening. And as usual, I'll see y'all back here, same place, same
That's
time
what it's
next
all
week.
about. Guns and butter, baby.